lesson 30, what is it, 31. Start with a new major subject, a very interesting one at that. It's based on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. We call it the philosophy of the Kleshas. In practical terms, it's the science of misery. Kleshas. What are kleshas? All the misery that we experience in life is considered to be kleshas. Now, many people, most of us, think that misery is just part of life and it's just bad luck that it happens to us. And often, if possible, we will try to blame outside factors, other people or circumstances. We try to blame for the experiences that we have. The ancient yogis developed an insight into how misery actually occurs. And they came to the conclusion that we are ourselves responsible for that. And you end up with a very deep study in human psychology in a very practical way. So, action leads to reaction. We have also talked about the law of cause and effect when we talk about karma, for example. So nothing stands on its own. Everything, without exception, that occurs, everything that happens is related to something. There is something that happened before it that led to what is happening, that led to what is occurring. There is always a cause. Always. And to understand misery that we experience in life, we must accept that we are responsible for misery. And to do that, we need to overcome ego again. There is a reason why the misery that happens in my life is different from the misery that happens in your life. Even when confronted with the same kind of misery, I experience that in a different way than you do. The question is why? And the reason is because we are different. We are conditioned different. We carry a different karma with us. So misery is klesha. Where does the klesha come from? We say it comes from within ourselves. And it starts with a samskara. What is a samskara? A samskara is dormant memory. Since you were born, and if you believe in rebirth, also previous lives, you carry memory with you. like a computer hard disk. You are full of data, full of memory. That memory does not manifest. So it's dormant. It's asleep. It's not manifesting, it's not active. So things that happened in the past, I always carry with me. That is a samskara. In daily life, there are situations. There are people that you come across that by their energy, by their action, can trigger, awaken the samskara. If the situation, the circumstance, or a person, the person's action, is on the same vibration, the same wavelength, the same kind of quality with that memory is triggered. So something in you starts to stir. That is called a vritti. So vritti is a samskara waking up, activating, which is energy. And so when memory is activated, it gives you you radiate a certain feeling, a certain emotion, a vibration. The environment picks up your vibration. It might be a traumatic experience that doesn't bother you in daily life, but suddenly you end up in a situation where that traumatic experience is basically triggered. So it becomes a vritti. And that subconsciously, it makes you angry. So you become very easily irritated in situations where people without such trauma would not react in such a violent way. So you become irritated, angry, exploding in anger at a situation that you are dealing with. It's a little bit an extreme situation because very often it's very subtle. But the environment, the people around you, subconsciously mostly pick up that vibration. They are affected by your irritation, your anger. And because of that, they will react. And they will not react by being nice to you, because you were not nice to them. Your anger, your irritation is being interpreted as unpleasant. So the reaction you can expect is unpleasant. And that is your misery. And that is what we call the klesha. The normal reaction is that people say, I didn't do anything wrong. Why are those people so nasty to me? But yoga says, wait a minute, think again. Because in the end, you triggered it. You may not like it, but actually you triggered it. Which also means that you can avoid it. But you have to be conscious of it first. So, all our suffering, all our misery, in the end, technically, works in the same way. And this is also the tragedy. The misery that we suffer repeats itself again and again. Why? Because you carry that samskara with you that is regularly triggered. And every time it is triggered, it turns into a negative vibration that then attracts a negative vibration from the environment. And you say, you throw up your hands in despair and you say, why am I always being so miserable? Why am I always confronting these kind of conflicts or these nasty people? And you look around you and you say, those people have no such problem. It's not fair. Why me? So yoga says, okay, it's true. What's happening to you is not happening to other people. But you can do something about it. Because in the end, you attract it. That is the tragedy. That it repeats itself. The good thing is, it works the other way around as well. If you understand how this works, instead of planting negative energy, instead of radiating negative vibrations, you replace those deliberately, which is, of course, a matter of control. You replace them by positive energy, by positive vibrations. How do you do that? By acting and reacting in positive ways, especially when surrounded by negative things happening. So this is the power of consciousness. This is the power of you as a yogi. Normally, when people find themselves in negative circumstances, they will simply go along with that and react in negative ways. And you have a vicious cycle of conflict and misery and suffering. The yogi sees what is going on. And you understand what is happening. And you say, I'm not going along with it. Then we learn non-violence. We refuse to go along with violence when confronted with it. We refuse to lie, to steal, to commit unchaste behavior, or to be guided by desire. We have these tendencies, we are aware of it, so we change it. We change it to our liking. As a result, if you radiate positive vibration, positive energy, you attract positive energy. Positive things come to you. So this is how it works. Why is this part of yoga? Because yoga is our tool, which you have already implemented for quite a while now, to support this process of consciousness and understanding how this works. And that is Kriya Yoga. I have explained Kriya before. We have the Kriya, of course, of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which are 7 techniques that help us, that guide us towards pranayama, energy control. The Kriya we're talking about here is the Kriya of Raja Yoga. Kriya basically means do. Remember? The word Kriya comes from the stem word kr. In the same way that the word karma comes from the stem word kr. So kr really means do. Kriya means doing consciously. Karma means the effect of doing. So the word karma is based on doing, but because of the just kr means do. When you transform the word karma, then it is the result of doing. the outcome or the result of doing. A kriya is doing, but doing in a particular way. Practicing mindfulness. We talked about this before, remember? Yoga always starts with kriya. Automatically, if you do yoga correctly, kriya, consciously, doing, standing still, it leads to what? It leads to jnana. Jnana is knowledge, wisdom, consciousness. Everybody who practices yoga correctly, not the modern yoga where you're constantly moving, listening to music, and a teacher that is constantly distracting you with talk about muscles and joints, but standing still in silence. Very immediately, yoga, doing correctly, leads to knowledge, wisdom, consciousness. And that automatically leads to karma. Many people think about karma in a very two-dimensional way. If I do something bad, then a bad thing will happen to me. But karma yoga as a stage means developing insight into your past and understanding yourself, self-study, that is self-study, understanding yourself and the things that happen now, here in the present, based on that insight of your past experiences, trauma, memory, and based on that, mapping out your future. And not only mapping out your future, avoiding making new karma further down the road. So karma yoga is in fact the highest stage of yoga, where you have total control over yourself and over your destiny. Based on insight that you get through jnana, which is caused by doing yoga correctly. This is a natural process. Jnana happens almost immediately. This insight leading to karma, the stage of karma yoga, that takes years to evolve. Because it is a huge puzzle that you are trying to put together piece by piece. Realization by realization. You're connecting the dots, putting the pieces of the puzzle, a huge puzzle, into place, but only one at a time. So jnana happens immediately when you start practicing yoga, and will of course deepen. Consciousness will awaken, and then from there on it will expand. Karma is a process that takes years, if not decades. So, when you start studying the book of Patanjali, this is actually how Patanjali introduces yoga. He said, this is yoga. He doesn't say yoga is asana, triangle pose and tree pose, and sitting on your mat and meditate. He says, yoga starts with kriya, it leads to consciousness, allowing you to develop insight into why you are actually experiencing misery. And that is why Eastern philosophy in general, and Buddhism, Hinduism, yoga in particular, are based on the idea that life is misery. But not realization that you should just accept passively, which is what many religious and spiritual people wrongly do. They just say, oh well, life is misery, so I should just accept that, misinterpreting the meaning of these kind of texts. Because yoga is clear about it. It says, Don't be stupid. This is how it works, and if you understand that, you can avoid it. You don't have to just suffer your misery and your conflicts because this is how it works. Now you have to roll up your sleeves and go to work, and from now on, you can actually avoid it. From the very beginning, I have tried to bring the message home that misery, failure, conflict, suffering are in fact not bad things. Because if you can overcome your ego, which normally causes us to identify with the misery, and therefore the misery only leads to emotion in which we drown, I have tried to bring the message home time and time again that no, we're only human, you will feel the pain, the emotion, but you must quickly investigate what is happening, try to understand rationally why the misery is happening, why you are suffering, and draw conclusions from it. Where does that lead to? It leads you to developing deep insight into yourself. Interestingly, the misery that we encounter in daily life situations, if we trace them back, if we contemplate them, it gives us an insight into who we are. And you will eventually trace the misery that you are experiencing in the present, you will eventually trace it back to an actual event that happened in the past, sometimes even going back to early childhood. It is in that way that I have developed certain memories going back to when I was a baby, which is not normal. People have no memory of early childhood. And those memories are usually memories that are related to some big movement of energy, something usually painful. The moment that you have traced it back to such event, the light goes on. It tells you so much about everything that happened afterwards. That experience has put onto you a certain quality, a certain vibration that has basically influenced everything that happened afterwards. Say that you have some kind of traumatic experience as a 2-year-old toddler, that samskara, that imprint, determines from that moment on how you act and react in certain situations, and that naturally leads to you attracting actions and reactions from the environment. In a simpler way, as a little child, you have a traumatic experience that makes you act and react in certain ways that is unacceptable to teachers and parents. So what happens? You get punished all the time. The teacher and the parents often do not understand that what you are doing is caused by something that happened when you were a baby. And so they will simply punish you for that kind of behavior, instead of trying to help you with it. So from that moment on that it has happened, for the rest of your life, basically, it will determine your destiny. As long as you are in that condition of ignorance, lack of consciousness, destiny controls you. You have no control over your destiny. The interesting thing that happens is when you start practicing yoga, Kriya leads to Jnana, you develop insight, and little by little, you stop acting and reacting in destructive ways caused by past traumatic experiences. And that is when your life starts to really change, and that is also when basically you take control of your destiny. So huge implications here. On short term, there's a long-term view. On short term, you will notice, maybe you have already noticed, that you are confronting less conflict and misery in your life. Because you started practicing yoga, you become more aware, mindful of how you conduct yourself in daily life situations. And so you have slowly started to take control. And you start especially focusing on those situations that are not pleasant. Nobody wants to voluntarily experience conflict and misery and suffering. So the moment you become conscious, the first thing you want to do is get rid of those negative events and experience more pleasant events or more constructive events in life. So you go here from a condition in which you are kind of helpless, being controlled by past experiences that you are not aware of, to slowly but certainly taking control, understanding where your behavior comes from, and as a result understanding why that attracts negative reactions from the environment, leading to suffering, leading to conflict. So since this is based on the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Sutra 1 of chapter 2 tells us austerity, self-study that leads to the knowledge of the self with a capital S, and complete resignation to Ishvara constitute Kriya Yoga, constitute preliminary yoga. So Kriya Yoga is interesting. Patanjali doesn't say Kriya Yoga is asana, meditation, pranayama. He says it's austerity. Do you remember what austerity means again? Yes. Not the Spanish kind. No, but what is austerity again? Standing still in asana is austerity. Sitting on your cushion, trying to control the mind activity is in fact austerity. Taking control. Austerity. So austerity, he has a funny way of saying this is yoga. You have to figure out yourself that austerity actually means referring to the whole framework that yoga is offering us in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, presenting us with exercises, asana, kriya, pranayama, mudra, meditation, several levels of meditation, but also guidelines about food. There is also an element of control there, about the circumstances, the ideal circumstances in which to practice, so that you create a space where you can practice in silence, in relative comfort, that you're not distracted by extreme cold or extreme heat. Austerity then leads, in the handout, I wrote this handout a long time ago, and in the handout I suggest that you must practice self-study. As if you can sit on your cushion and say to yourself, now I close my eyes and I want to study myself. It doesn't work like that. The suggestion is in the handout is that is how it works, but that's not how it works. Austerity leads to jnana. Practicing yoga correctly leads to consciousness, increased sensitivity and consciousness. And that naturally leads to self-study. Remember, we've seen this before. The first thing when people's consciousness awakens, the first thing we feel interest in is ourselves. Everybody who starts awakening consciousness as a result of practicing yoga, the first exploration is exploration of the self. You become curious about not yourself that you see in the mirror or based on your identifications with culture, with family, with your favorite sports games or food. No, you want to go beyond those superficial identifications and figure out who you really are. That is self-study with a capital S. The word study suggests that you do that deliberately, but it's something that happens spontaneously as a result of your changing consciousness. But there is a problem here. Increasing consciousness and sensitivity leads to increased vulnerability. It leads to increased perception. And your increased consciousness leads you to many memories, events that happened in the past, that took place, that are very often not so nice, not so pleasant. You would say, well, why not just ignore those then, if they are unpleasant? Isn't it better to just ignore them? No. Because those things that happened in the past determine who you are now in the future. And we're not satisfied about that because it always leads to, we always find ourselves suffering, confronting conflict and misery and failure often as a result of things that happened in the past. Now we start to see the link. And that allows you to control and avoid the misery. But if this happens rather subconsciously, and it does happen to many yoga practitioners, because they practice without actually studying that the way that we do that here, they become more sensitive and more conscious. And as a result, they become emotionally unstable. Instead of doing something constructive with their increased consciousness and insight into themselves, their ego makes them identify and they drown in their emotions, which is natural and human. To deal with that, we have, of course, pratyahara, but Patanjali says resignation to God. Now, what the hell is that supposed to mean? You think, oh my God, I might as well just go to a church. I didn't know yoga was a religion. Because that's what this seems to imply. Now we have to pray and worship and make an altar in the corner. No. This has a very practical and valuable meaning. Resignation to God means acceptance. How do you deal with past experiences? first and foremost, accept that you cannot turn back the clock. You cannot go back in time and change what happened in the past. So you can suffer from it and be miserable from it for the rest of your life. But how is that going to help you? It isn't. It just increases your misery. First and foremost, accept what happened. Then the word God, for me, I always replace God with universe. The universe has a plan. We learn through our misery. I have said it again and again. So when you first and foremost accept that you cannot change the facts as they are, things that happened in the past, the second thing is that you start seeing, and you will, as a result of increased consciousness, you will eventually see that those things that happened, when we process them, they actually make us grow. They strengthen us. They give us tools that we use to actually improve our lives instead of being more miserable. And when you start to see that, you completely change your perception of your past traumatic experiences. No mistake about it, trauma is terrible, and it should not happen if we could avoid it. But it is part of life. Yoga helps us to awaken consciousness, develop insight. We cannot undo the trauma, but what we can do is try to canalize it, to transform it into something constructive. Do something positive with that experience. In English, there is the expression, when life presents you with lemons, don't become a sour grape. That is my addition. Make lemonade. When life presents you with lemons, make lemonade out of it. Do something good with it. Do something positive with it. Resignation to God means a lot of things. Acceptance, you can't go back in time, but you have to make the next step and see that the things that happened in the past that feel traumatic, that feel painful, in fact, become your teachers. When you contemplate those experiences, they become your fuel, in fact. People who have suffered tremendous trauma, who have the fortune to be able to transform it as a result of a process like yoga. There are other ways, of course. There are also therapies that might help you, guide you towards the point that you can do something positive with it. There are other practices like yoga that lead to the same. Those people, fueled by their past experiences, end up doing amazing things in their lives that otherwise would not have been possible. So in the end, it fuels you. It gives you a purpose in life. For me, obviously, that's yoga. And I had to come to Korea for that. The excuse to come to Korea was my interest in Korean martial arts. But it was just an excuse. I'm totally not interested in it anymore. So it's clear that it was just an excuse. But I had to do the impossible. I didn't have a multinational company that would pay my ticket, that would accommodate me here in a nice apartment, and that would have a plan for me to work here for the next 3 years, including giving me a visa. I had to do it all without such support. And when I came to Korea, I didn't even have a place to stay, so I stayed in a yogwan, in a small motel, for 2 weeks before eventually finding a room. Fueled by past experiences and the determination, because of insight, the determination to leave it behind and turn it into lemonade. I did. In contrast with the way that my 2 brothers dealt with it, they didn't deal with it, they just drowned, and they literally drowned. And this is the power that you get here. That is why yoga truly is empowering and liberating in the end. Liberation is not being a saint like Buddha or Jesus Christ, because when we think about it in that way, we think it's just unrealistic to ever get there. But liberation starts here. It starts already at the beginning. May not be a full-blown liberation, but you are on the path of liberating yourself more and more. And you will truly have less and less misery in your life, less and less conflicts. And those that come, because there will still things happen, are new issues, are drilling into new memory and giving you yet again new, additional insights. But the frequency with which misery comes to you will be less and less. While unconditioned people have misery on a daily basis, you become more and more free from misery. Relatively sattvic, relatively peaceful, relatively in a pleasant mind, in a pleasant mood. And once in a while, in the beginning maybe every 3 days, and then in a later stage every week, and then in a later stage once a month. It's of course a fluid situation, it doesn't work like calculating days, but you will have less and less conflict and misery. But there is another problem here. When you're confronted with misery every day, you don't see it, you don't realize it, and you just suffer through it. But when you become more and more used to being peaceful and free from misery, when misery hits you, it hits you all the harder. You become more sensitive to it. Because it's so nice. You had several days that you were free from all of that nonsense, and now you are hit again. And it just hits you harder because you know how it feels to be free from it. It sounds like a problem, but the good news here is it will make you more determined and more motivated and do your best more to avoid the next misery. And so the frequency with which it comes gets less and less. More and more space in between each event. It's a game, it's a dynamic game. Play that game. See it as a game. The problem is ego. When hit by misery, we say, oh, look at me, I'm so miserable, poor me. No. Turn it around and say, oh, foolish me. You smile, you laugh at yourself, and you say, oh my God, I did it again. Let's try to do it better next time. That is also resignation to God. The moment that you become serious about things, you block your energy. And when you block your energy, you have no contemplation power anymore. You do not see the essence anymore. But as long as you play, keep a playful attitude, energy continues to circulate, you have your contemplative moments in which you connect the dots, in which you have your insights in your misery. Sutra II. Kriya Yoga is practiced in order to attenuate Kleshas and to bring about Samadhi. Actually, it's very clear based on what I already explained. Attenuating something means soften it, lessen it, reduce it. So, Kriya Yoga, which is what we do, asana, pranayama, meditation, that's Kriya Yoga for us, is practiced to reduce the kleshas. How? Because of this, you become conscious. You start connecting the dots, and that allows you, that gives you the power to avoid it simply by paying attention. That it leads to samadhi gives us also an idea what samadhi really is. The many yogis, when they try to explain samadhi, they end up in very academic language, very scientific language, and they make samadhi something from out of the earth that is almost impossible to attain unless you practice 24 hours a day, 365 days a week, a year. Ajita made it very simple for us. A very easy, doable technique. It is a technique, but here the suggestion from Patanjali is samadhi can actually occur naturally if the condition is right. When you are not distracted by kleshas, which means emotions, conflicts, you become calm and peaceful naturally. And that leads to the quality of contemplation. Every human being in the right circumstances naturally starts contemplating. And that is samadhi. So yoga is not only about your yoga mat and your meditation cushion. It's about bringing about change in your daily life, at work and at home. Make adjustments that make life simpler, that make life free from potential conflicts and misery. And that's not easy because you spend 20, 30, maybe 40 years digging yourself into a hole that exists out of those daily life conflicts and miseries. But the start is today. From today you start bringing about small, incremental changes, little by little. It's like building a house. You start with the foundation, and you start brick by brick, you build the walls. And throughout the years, you keep adding bricks, and you start to see a structure with separate rooms, and a garage, and a restroom, and a shower, windows, a door, and you keep putting bricks on top of one another, and there is a second floor, then there is a roof. But it starts with nothing. You start laying the foundation. That is your yoga practice. Your yoga practice is the foundation, and you're increasing insight, you're increasing consciousness, that eventually becomes a beautiful palace in which you then can pleasantly spend your life. Remember the words gradual. Because change that doesn't come gradual causes disruption. If you want things to change fast, it causes disruption. And you see this on all levels of life, of society. Gradual. If things don't go gradual, chaos occurs. There is a good example that you can see gradual at work. The Corona crisis. When Corona struck, the need then arose that people needed to be masked, vaccinated, and try to control what is happening. But governments have been very careful to do it all very gradual. So in the beginning, everything was voluntary. Everything was an advice. But as time passed, they start to turn up the screws. They start to increase the pressure, but very gradually. Because if they do it too sudden, people start to riot, and it's actually still happening. But it would have been so much worse if they would have done it too fast. So every time a little bit stricter, every time a little bit more push. And now certain countries make vaccination mandatory, or you're just not welcome anymore, anywhere. But 5-6 months ago, that was unthinkable. 1 year ago, it was, again, a totally different situation. Very gradual. And that is really how life works. The disruption that I'm talking about, the chaos, in the case of Corona, would be people's protests, which are ferocious here and there. Also, especially in the Netherlands, people have been... There are so many conspiracy theories that for a well-thinking human being just totally don't make sense, but people strongly believe, because there are powers at work that spread false news with the purpose of sowing chaos. And you cannot force those people to believe otherwise. So very gradual, the government works towards a situation where the virus can be brought under control. Gradual. Yoga is very gradual. Bring about change in your daily life when you have a job, when you are part of a family, all these kind of things. It takes years to really actually change that. If you feel the need, you cannot just say, okay, tomorrow I will change the whole thing. Because it doesn't work like that. If you do it, if you function like that, you cause so much disruption that not only harms yourself, but the people involved as well. Okay, questions about the Kleshas? The next couple of weeks, we will continue reading the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali related to the Kleshas. So we will talk a lot about how all this works. We will try to give you much more insight in how you can deal with it also in a proactive way. Okay, let's have a short break.